Hey everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving into a topic that's fascinated historians, theologians, and artists for centuries. What did Jesus actually look like? The image most of us know, a man with long, light brown hair, fair skin, and blue eyes, is a familiar one, but how accurate is it? Let's find out. First, let's consider the most likely appearance of Jesus. He was a Galilean Jewish man living in the 1st century. Based on this historical context, scholars overwhelmingly agree that he would have had features common to people from that region at that time. This means he likely had olive-toned skin, dark brown to black hair, and brown eyes. Think of the typical appearance of a modern-day person from the Middle East. That's a much closer picture than the European depictions we often see. So, what does the Bible say? Well, surprisingly little. The New Testament doesn't give a detailed physical description of Jesus. There's a passage in the Old Testament, in the book of Isaiah, that some Christians interpret as a prophecy about the Messiah. It says he had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. This suggests his appearance was unremarkable, someone who would blend into a crowd, not stand out for his looks. The book of Revelation describes a glorified, divine vision of Jesus with hair white like wool and eyes like a flame of fire, but this is symbolic, apocalyptic imagery, not a literal description of his earthly appearance. This lack of detail left a huge space for cultural interpretation. As Christianity spread across the world, different cultures began to depict Jesus in their own image. In Europe, he was portrayed with fair skin and light hair. In Ethiopia, he's depicted with dark skin and African features. In Asia, he often has East Asian characteristics. These portrayals weren't meant to be historically inaccurate. They were a way for people to connect with Jesus on a personal, cultural level, seeing the divine reflected in their own communities. This brings us to the broader question of the race and appearance of Jesus. The concept of race as we understand it today, based on skin color and continental ancestry, is a modern one. A 1st-century Jewish person wouldn't have identified with these categories. He would have seen himself as a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Judah. So, calling Jesus white or black is applying modern labels to an ancient person. Historically speaking, he was a Middle Eastern Semitic man. He was Jewish, both religiously and ethnically. To reconstruct his historical appearance, we can look at a few things. First, the literary traditions from the time. As we mentioned, the biblical texts are vague. Some later, non-biblical texts tried to fill in the gaps, but these were often written centuries later and were heavily influenced by the writer's own culture. For example, some early writers described him based on the prevailing Roman ideals of beauty. Interestingly, Quranic and Muslim traditions also hold Jesus, or Isa, in high regard as a prophet, but much like the Bible, the Quran doesn't offer a specific physical description. Islamic art, due to prohibitions on depicting prophets, rarely portrays him, and when it does, it's often without facial features to avoid idolatry. The focus is always on his message, not his looks. In more modern times, the Latter-day Saint movement, or Mormonism, generally depicts Jesus in the familiar European style, consistent with its origins in 19th-century America. However, their scriptures also describe him visiting the ancient inhabitants of the Americas, which has led to a variety of artistic interpretations within their faith. The emergence of racial theories in the 18th and 19th centuries heavily influenced how people thought about Jesus' appearance. During this period, some European thinkers actively promoted the idea of a white Aryan Jesus, separating him from his Jewish and Middle Eastern roots. This was often used to justify racial hierarchies and anti-Semitism, a dark and unfortunate chapter in the history of this question. So, can science give us a clearer picture? In 2001, forensic anthropologist Richard Neve created a reconstruction that made headlines worldwide, using a Semitic skull from 1st-century Galilee, computer modeling, and knowledge of the local population's traits. He and his team created a model of a man with a broad face, a prominent nose, dark olive skin, dark eyes, and short, dark, curly hair, in line with Jewish customs of the time. He also likely had a beard. This forensic reconstruction is probably the closest we'll ever get to knowing what a typical man from that time and place looked like. Ultimately, what did Jesus look like? The historical evidence points to a man with brown skin, dark hair, and brown eyes, a typical Middle Eastern man of his time. The long-haired, fair-skinned image is a product of European art history, particularly from the Renaissance onward. This image became dominant globally through colonialism and cultural exchange. We should also mention the idea of a chiropoetic images said to have been made without human hands. The most famous is the Shroud of Turin, a linen cloth bearing the faint image of a crucified man. While many believers see it as the burial cloth of Jesus, scientific analysis, including radiocarbon dating, has placed its origin in the Middle Ages. Similarly, throughout history, many people have reported visions of Jesus, and their descriptions almost always align with the art and imagery they're already familiar with. This all flows into the vast world of artistic portrayals, from the earliest catacomb drawings, showing him as a beardless Roman-style shepherd to the majestic Byzantine icons with their solemn, divine gaze to the humanistic and often fair-skinned figures of the Renaissance. Every era has remade Jesus in its own image. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It shows the universal appeal of his message, transcending any single culture or appearance. So, in summary, while the Bible is silent on his physical features, history and science give us a pretty good idea. The historical Jesus was a first-century Galilean Jew, and he would have looked like one with olive skin, dark hair, and dark eyes. The popular image of a white Jesus is a cultural invention, a powerful symbol in European art, but not a historical reality. Perhaps the most important takeaway is that his message was for all of humanity, and that's why people all over the world, from every background, see a reflection of themselves and the divine in him. The true essence of Jesus isn't found in his skin color, but in his life and teachings. Thanks for watching, everyone. What are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. See you next time.